36 was the final number. Hello, hello, everybody. I think only Audrey can hear me right now. And Rosemary, too. Hi, everybody. Sammy. Just waiting for, everyone to kind of show up here. So just hang tight. And my guess is we'll get started at 6:01 p.m. I actually, my preference in general is to start at 6 p.m. because my personal belief is if you schedule a meeting at 6 p.m., then everyone should be ready to go at 6 p.m. But my personal belief is not held by everybody. So yeah, we'll get started momentarily. Thank you guys for being here. And more people should be coming in right now. Here they come. I hope. Good, Claire's here. That's good. Hi, everybody. Just hang tight for a minute. I'm going to get started. Yeah, I'm officially going to get started at 6:01. I'm going to give everyone the 1 minute benefit of the doubt here. How's everybody doing? How's life on the internet? How's Zoom life? I think we're doing it right. I think we're doing it right by being on Zoom and learning this way. It's just like it's the smart play, and sometimes the smart play isn't the fun play. It's like folding your poker hand. It's like you don't really want to do it, but it might be smart.
It opens up a lot of options, which is cool.
Yeah, I would say more about that.
I just took a writing class, and we had people across the country. We had people in New York, Atlanta, Denver, and LA. Which, if it had been an LA class, I mean, there would have been different people, which is fine. But it just broadens the horizon of who you can meet, which is cool, and who you can work with.
Yeah, that's great. All right, here it is, 6:01 p.m. Oh, and Chelsea's here too. This is good. It's 6:01 p.m. Our participants are here in the room. Chelsea did the thing I'm just about to ask you all to do, which is use your video if possible. It's so much more fun to see video than to see black rectangles. Yay, thank you guys. All right, great. It's so hard to teach to a class of black rectangles. Thank you. Hi, guys. So yes, that's basically it. Those are my Zoom protocols. Let's see each other. It's kind of fun. Stay on mute until prompted. Basically, Chris will ask questions here and there, and you can raise your hand in the participants tab. If you go to participants, then raise hand. Like I need to teach you guys about how to use Zoom. You all, I'm sure, are experts at this point. I'm Tutor Ted, in case you don't know me. Yeah, this is me in the place where I do my work. Our teacher today, this is very fun. The most fun part for me is that I get to hand it off to an excellent teacher and then sit back and listen. So nice. Is Chris Smith. Chris has been working with Tutor Ted for 2 years since he moved to LA from New York. And before that, he ran his own test prep company on Long Island. And people coming in, that's good. He studied creative writing at Dartmouth. And he also has professional training as a screenwriter. In fact, we were just talking about a screenwriting class that he just finished. I too am a screenwriter. You can see my script over my left-hand shoulder back there. I did not get to it today. That's part of the challenge of writing. I'm sure you guys know that too. Chris is a really thoughtful, beloved tutor of ours. And when students ask us for college essay help, he's our go-to guy. So he's also got a plan. And he's going to go through that plan with you. Yeah, we do this stuff. A lot of our tutors are writers in some capacity or another, and this is one of the things we love to do. So, yeah, that's it for me. I'm going to shut up. I'm going to let Chris talk. Chris, take it away.
Awesome. All right. Hi, everyone. Thanks for coming. So the plan for today is to start by going through a little presentation on some basics of the essay. At this point, there's probably people at many different stages. A lot of you might be done. A lot of you might be just looking to polish. Some people might still feel like, I don't know what to do. So I'm going to kind of cover everything. But if you do have questions about specific parts, Hopefully we'll get to that. One thing you can probably do is if you have like a question you want to throw in chat and just post it there, and sometimes I can jump to it as we're going through the presentation. Otherwise, as you might have heard, we are going to do a couple like little mini workshops with a couple people who have submitted essays. So thank you guys, by the way. It was Claire and Chelsea, I believe. So we'll probably try and spend like 10 to 15 minutes on each of those and do like a tiny version of what I would do if I was working one-on-one with a student. So let's get started with that kind of the overall basics. So the kind of nuts and bolts of how to do your essay. So that working? Everyone can see that? All right. So so I call the presentation is called Telling Your Story because I think that is the most important thing that you can do with your essay is tell your story to the college, and we're going to talk about exactly what that means, but it kind of is summarized here. Why do we write essays? Why is that part of the application? So the number one thing is that it's to show colleges your personality. Often numbers on a page or like the clubs that you're a part of give an idea, but it's not the same as talking to someone. And since we can't always talk to every student who's applying to a school, colleges will often try to get that through the essay. So you're trying to show off who you are, which is a different task than a lot of the rest of the application. And we'll talk about, displaying your writing style is something we'll talk about a little bit more. But the main thing I want you to take from this is that it's not like the rest of your application where you're trying to look good necessarily. It's more like you're trying to look like who you are, and whoever that is fine. So that's why we want to use it to tell our story. So let's talk about what makes a good essay a little bit. The things that you want to include or want to aim to include. So the first thing is that you want it to be memorable. The hardest part, or kind of the biggest obstacle you face with your essay, is that the college essay readers usually have to do something like 100 applications, 200 applications a day, depending on their quota, which means they're reading 200 essays, which means it's easy to forget a lot of them. So you want to pick something that's going to stand out, and that often means that something unique, something specific to you, something even that doesn't really seem like what you would normally be using to advertise yourself, like you imagine the college application is, can be effective. One of my favorite examples is a friend of mine from college, and so he got into Dartmouth, which means that clearly his essay wasn't terrible. His entire essay was about how he was once at the ice skating rink, and when the Zamboni came out, he said, "Hey, look, there's the gazebo." And all of his friends made fun of him because that was a stupid thing to say. And what he turned that into was an essay about, first, just the event, that it was kind of silly and tiny and funny. But secondly, he also used it to make a point about how words and language and vocabulary are something that's very important to him, and why that was a particularly embarrassing moment because he puts so much importance on words. So I like that as an example of something that is unique. It's very weird. No one else is going to have that essay, but it still has that second bullet point there. It gives insight into your character, who you are. It doesn't have to be huge insight. It doesn't have to necessarily be the core thing about that makes you you. I mean, it can be, and that's great, but it can also just be something small that illustrates who you are through maybe a moment like that. The gazebo Zamboni moment was small and kind of hinted at who my friend was, not necessarily like, here's his life story. And then the last thing that makes a good essay is being a good writer, right? Clear structure, clean prose, just the thing that communicates your idea comfortably, not overwrought, not trying to impress anyone. If you get your idea across simply and clearly, that's the best way to tell your story. So kind of going off of what I mentioned with the Zamboni essay a little bit, my strategy, my recommendation for people is to take a risk on your essay, meaning don't try and do something that you think the colleges are going to want to see. Don't try and do something that you think makes you look good necessarily. And similarly, don't worry about looking bad. Because if you do something a little crazy or do something that stands out and it catches the reader's attention, then you've won someone who's on your side, who then might advocate for you when throughout the rest of the admissions process will they say, maybe, for instance, at a school that might be a reach school for you, and maybe your numbers aren't quite where they would want them to be, the person who read your essay might be like, I know that the numbers are not quite where they want to be, but this person has a great essay. I think they're a really interesting person. And so we want to, they can push you through the process, perhaps even when your numbers might not be doing the job for you. Whereas on the flip side, it's hard to destroy your application with an essay. I'm sure you can. I'm sure there's some topics that would absolutely be a disaster, but most of the time you're not going to like tank your application with an essay. So there's a lot of upside to taking that risk and not a lot to lose if maybe it doesn't land or it doesn't quite work. Similarly, there's some stuff to avoid that can maybe make it a little bit too common, a little bit boring for your reader, or otherwise just not do what the essay is supposed to do. Number one, you're not really advertising yourself in the way that a resume might. And you're also not even necessarily talking about your best qualities. In fact, it's often more interesting to talk about your flaws or things that you struggle with, because that's more humanizing. That's what makes people, as opposed to these superhuman, brilliant applicants that they definitely want. The rest of your application does that, and this is about to humanize you, make you a real person a little bit. A couple other things. There's some overdone themes that we'll talk about. A third thing is that it is about you, but you want to make sure that your essay is about how you interact with the world, not just about you, period. And actually one of our example essays does we'll see a little bit of that, how you can see what your goals are with the world. And finally, I know some people are tempted to say, hey, I need to sound really smart with my essay. I need to show them that I'm intelligent, which is not the case. Good writing is clear writing. Good writers use accurate words, not necessarily the most impressive, the biggest words. So there's lots of overdone themes, but, and it might be the kind of thing where you might need to check in with someone to see, like a college counselor or me or someone, to see if it's overdone. But things like, a lot of athletes will write about the big game, the most important game of their career. And unfortunately, that happens so often that it just blurs into they're all the same. It's all the same sports movie, basically. Similarly, a lot of people like to write about maybe a relative who passed away who was really important to them, but it ends up being more about the relative than the actual student. And third, and this is, I want to be specific with this, charity work I think is fine to talk about. I think some people fall into the habit of, or like the trap of feeling like they need to show that they're a saint, right? Like their whole thing is just about how good they've been to the world, which is fine if that's important to you. I think you do want to talk about it, but you don't want to just make it like making yourself look as good as possible, because that almost is like dehumanizes you, right? Someone who's perfect and always does the right thing is actually, in some ways, not an interesting person. So it can be a little bit of a trap, I think, in that sense. All right, so if like I said, people might be at different points in the process now that we're closer to submitting these applications, but my big picture for how to take an essay from beginning to end looks something like this. So the first thing is how to brainstorm ideas. And by the way, all 5 of these we're going to talk about the specifics of. You want to come up with a bunch of ideas until you can generate one that you feel really good about, has a really strong emotional response. The next thing you want to do is draft it, which is just taking that idea and word vomiting it onto paper, getting something out there, because then that allows you to do number 3, which is take everything that you put out there and polish it up, make it look really nice. And then the last couple steps are just to almost like tempering steel. You want to take that good essay, you want to get feedback to find the flaws and hammer them out, and then repeat that process, and also repeat this entire process to write multiple essays. So near the end, we're going to talk about that a little bit more. Okay, so brainstorming. If you're at the stage where you have no idea what you want to write about, my recommendation is to not worry about the prompts too much. They can be helpful, but you don't have to worry about them. And instead, just think back on your life and say, what are some points in my life that stood out to me? And it could be they stood out because they were funny, or they were sad, or they were when you were filled with awe over something, or even when you were angry at something. Anything that made an emotional impact to you is something you can then communicate to your reader, to your audience. And the stronger it was of a memory for you, the more it meant to you, the more it can mean to your audience. So that's what you're looking for when you're coming up with ideas. But don't feel like you have to come up with that idea right away. Often what you want to do is just start listing ideas as many as you can until eventually when you've done 15, 30, 50, 100 ideas, you will stumble across one that kind of triggers that feeling for you. And so this kind of summarizes that idea. If it's something that creates a feeling for you, that means that it shows something about your character, and it means that it will communicate something to your reader. Okay, so once you have your idea, how do you tell this story? And I'm of the belief that all essays, even academic essays, even really strict proofs almost, follow a story arc. I think that humans think in terms of stories. Pretty much, even when you're thinking, like I said, like a logical proof, in some way, it makes most sense to us when we think of it like a story beginning, middle, and end. I think it's a very natural way for humans to understand things, and therefore it's a very natural way for you to present your essay. So what is the general story arc that we want to use? Well, it's the same story arc that we would use in writing for TV or writing for movies or writing a novel. You always want to follow the beginning, middle, end of number one, what do you as a character want? So at the beginning of your story, you want to want something. You want to have something that you don't have yet. Number two, the bulk of your essay is how do you try and get it? So we see the process of you actually working towards your goal. And then the end of the essay is what happened, right? Did you get it or not? It doesn't matter, but we want to know. It doesn't matter which one, I should say. And then what did you learn? How did that change you, right? We want to see a different person at the end of the essay than we had at the beginning. So some of the examples are essays I've worked with. I wrote with someone whose goal was to cycle across the United States. Similarly, I had a friend who wrote their entire essay on the time they almost choked to death on a Whopper at Burger King. And even in a situation like that, there's still a clear want, right? I want to not die from eating this burger, and that's enough to drive the story, that we know where the character is and what they want. And so this is an example, if you're interested in more detail on this. I won't go into a ton of it today, but I really like Dan Harmon's story structure. Dan Harmon is the creator of Community and Rick and Morty. And this is how he organizes that idea. And you can see it kind of follows that same structure. We start with you want something, you have a need. Then you go out and try to get it, right? You go into a new world, you search for it, you find it perhaps. Again, that might change. You take it, you return, and then you've changed through that process, right? That's the core story. That's the core of myth. That's the core of any story that we get emotionally attached to tends to follow some version of that arc. So that's what I'm advocating for you guys to think about in your story. All right, so once you have a rough idea of what you're doing, you have a brainstormed idea, you have an idea of here's the thinking, beginning, middle, and end, here's what I want, here's how I'm going to get it, and so on. Just some ideas of when you start writing things you want to do. The first and kind of most important is to give it a title. I would say this is surprisingly rare. Most essays I see when someone says, hey, check out my essay, I would say more often than not, they don't have a title, which I think is a huge weakness. For one, titles do a great job of establishing audience expectations, your reader's expectation. And you have a lot of fun stuff you can do with that title in terms of you can sometimes allude to something that maybe is a bit of a deception, right? Like maybe your title indicates something, but then you're kind of tricky and your essay ends up being about a second meaning of that word. So fun stuff like that. But more importantly than that, what a title does is it keeps your story and your essay and your point tight, right? Your title should summarize the main argument of your essay, the main thrust of your essay, and having that title always pulls you back to that idea, right? It's an anchor point for that idea. So even if you don't have a final title, I recommend you have a working title at all times, even before you write anything else on the page, write a title down, because I think it's going to give you it's almost like a lightning rod, right? For all of your ideas. Everything's going to stay focused around that one thing you're trying to communicate. We talked about creating a beginning, middle, and end. And then a couple other draft tips. Don't worry about word count at first. It will be important, obviously, because you can only submit so many words. But I think it's easier to go ahead and write your story however long it takes and then edit it later. And if it's shorter than the limit, that's actually even better sometimes, because shorter is often easier and easier to digest for the reader. So don't worry about the word count until you have to at the end. And then similarly, don't worry about overemphasizing the theme. Like, I think a lot of people feel like they need to really hammer their theme home when it comes to their essays. And I think that if you tell the story well, that will be the work of communicating your theme. So don't feel like you have to go out of your way to really just, explain and explain and explain how you changed. I would rather you follow that kind of the king of all writing advice: show, don't tell. Show how you changed. Show what your ideas were by through your actions, rather than telling your audience what happened or how you felt. When you're writing, some things to think about in terms of the style. This kind of goes back to what I said before. I know a lot of people think they should maybe sound really impressive. They should use big words. They should sound really smart when they're writing that essay, writing their essay. And I would say that sometimes that might be the case if that's how you feel you naturally communicate. If you that's just how you talk. An example, if any of you guys have read David Foster Wallace, his natural voice is extremely intellectual, verbose, detailed, but it doesn't come across, well, that's a lie. Some people do think he's trying to impress you, and maybe he is, but it feels very natural. It feels like that's where he's comfortable talking from, and that's the important part. So often what I recommend is, like, rather than thinking about an academic essay, think about how you would tell this story to your friends, because that's often a better guideline to clearly communicate the story than trying to impress your reader or trying to sound smart or anything like that. And show, don't tell we talked about. Yeah, I actually already mentioned this stuff before, so you guys get that. This is just an overall hint that you've probably heard in writing class, but I think it's really important, and I have rarely found an essay that doesn't benefit from it. So story technique in media res is Latin. It just means in the middle of things. So start your story in the middle of the action as a hook for your reader, right? If you start and the reader, something's already happening and the reader doesn't even know what it is yet, that's exciting, interesting, they want to know more. And if you've done a good job of finding that story that excites you, rather than kind of ease into it, you start even later than that. Another great piece of writing advice: start as late as possible and end as early as possible in your story. So this would be kind of an extension of that, where you start in the middle of something and it really hooks your reader. We're going to have an example of this. Should we have someone read this again, Ted, do you think?
Yeah, sure. This is a fun paragraph. I like this one.
Yeah, let's, so if anyone wants to volunteer to read this out loud, we can kind of talk about it. And if not, I'm going to make Ted do it.
Who's a brave volunteer? Someone who's not already planning on volunteering today. I don't know who said that, but go for it. Oh, but Chelsea, we're going to do your essay anyway. How about Lucas? Lucas is right next to Chelsea. Sorry, Lucas, to put you on the spot.
How are we doing? Can we hear?
Yeah, Lucas, are you reading that? Sorry, I can't hear you.
Yeah.
Oh, there you go.
Now I can hear you. Yeah. Okay. Good.
What am I reading? Just the first couple.
No, just read the whole thing. Read the whole paragraph.
Okay. Leaves rustled 30 feet below us, or at least I thought it was about 30 feet. I couldn't see. Branch upon branch wove needles into pine green veil over the forest floor. Ryan wrapped his fingers around his model 105B steel Daisy 4.5 millimeter BB gun as his eyes meticulously scanned the horizon through gaps in the tree cover. Ryan raised the whistle to his lips, and our enemy felt closer than ever. Nature was suddenly more unforgiving than wondrous. Ryan, my 6-year-old voice quavered, I want to go home.
Awesome. Thanks so much. So this is, I just wanted to use this as an example this was the beginning of an essay from a student that I worked with a long time ago, 10 years ago. And you kind of don't know what the essay is going to be about, but you know that you're in the middle of a pretty, high intensity and scary situation. He's got this enemy that our enemy felt closer than ever. We don't know what that is. For some reason, there's a BB gun involved. They're in a tree. So it's sort of a situation where immediately the reader is kind of like literally in the middle of it, and they don't know everything. So you're drawing them in so that they can learn a little bit more. I have one more of these, but I think we're going to skip it just because I do want to make sure we have time to get to everything later. But you guys can imagine that's the general idea of starting with something strong that hooks your reader in, and often that just means starting in the middle of your story. All right, so we are telling a story, but we also are, we do have a thesis, not exactly like an academic essay, but you do have a point to your essay, right? You're telling the story not just because it's funny, although it's good if it's funny, or not just because it's sad or whatever, but you're telling it because you want to communicate something about yourself. You have a point to make. And the goal should be that you want to have that point come across without having to repeat it multiple times to your reader. You, again, you want to show it, and hopefully you don't even have to tell it at all, although usually it's more like at the very end, you earn yourself a little bit where you can say, you can emphasize, and here's what I learned, right? And this is somewhat a style choice. Some people prefer to be a little bit more elaborate in explaining it, but I personally feel that it's actually more does less, or other way around, sorry, less does more. The less that you emphasize it, the more that it can just soak into your reader and kind of be absorbed rather than feel like you're punching them in the face with your point. Okay, so if you have written everything and you have a first draft, you've told the story from beginning to end, and that's where you're at, and you want to know what to do next. Well, the way to make your paper better from that point is to cut ruthlessly. Good writers are absolutely brutal at cutting their own work. Anything that's unnecessary, even if it's your favorite part of the story, if it doesn't serve the overall story or the overall point you're trying to make, you want to, as they say in writing, kill your darlings, right? You got to get rid of anything, even if you love it. You need to make sure that your final paper is sleek and pointed. You want to get to your point without any extraneous stuff. In terms of style and language, a good way to work out whether the piece is working or whether you have even just catching proofreading stuff is to read it out loud. Often reading your essay out loud, you might stumble over certain parts, and that's an indication that something's not really smooth with the language there. So it's just a way to catch places that might, when you read it in your head, sound okay, but to other people, it might actually not be clear. So it's a way to catch that for yourself. And it's also really important to make sure you polish your essay and make it come across as super professional, which means proofread it as much as you can, have others proofread it, just because it's kind of a very simple step that if you have typos or misspellings in your essay, it makes you look bad. It's like having mustard on your shirt or something. And it's fairly easy to avoid, right? I mean, proofreading, even if you can't catch it, if you have several other people proofread your essay, then you usually can avoid those things. So just because it's so avoidable, you want to make sure you do indeed avoid any of those typos. All right, so once you've written it, you're going to get some feedback. And it's very important how you use that feedback, because not all feedback is equivalent, and there are a couple wrong ways to use feedback. So first off, you do want feedback. Feedback is important, because if you write it and you're like, great, I did a great job, this is a great essay, I'm going to send it off, and that's that. Well, you're not always tuned in to how, like, the way that you tell the story is not necessarily the same way that it lands for someone else. So if it's not, like, you might intend for it to land a certain way, but if it doesn't, the only way to know that is by getting it out there and getting feedback on it. So it's not that you want to change your voice or kind of conform to the way other people want you to write. It's more that you want to make sure that what you're trying to get across gets across, and feedback can help you do that. So then the flip side of that is make sure you're very selective with your feedback and don't just listen to everything everyone tells you. It's likely that everyone's going to have some opinion on what your writing is, and a lot of them will conflict. So think of it more like the stuff that when you hear it, you're like, man, that's a really good point. I didn't think about it that way. I am going to make that change. That's great. That's good feedback. If someone says something and, like, maybe you don't understand it, or if you feel like, man, this person wants this essay to be something other than what I want it to be, then just throw it away. You don't have to use that. Like, everyone has an opinion, and you only need the ones that are useful to you. And so finally, it's also just a good idea to get a range of feedback. If you only show it to your parents, they might love it, but your college counselor might have a different opinion. Your friends might have a different opinion. And so I think it's good to get feedback from a lot of different places so you can really get a sense of where your essay is and what it's trying to accomplish. One of the last things that I want to say before we get into doing our little mini clinic here is a lot of people think, oh, my college essay, meaning my only college essay, this is the essay that I will write. And often it's the case that your first essay is not your best. There's an adage in screenwriting that when you write your first screenplay, put it in a drawer and then go write 2 more screenplays. And when you come back to that first one, you'll be like embarrassed at all of the stuff you didn't know how to do before you had that experience. So essays aren't the same. I mean, I think plenty of first essays can be good as well, but it often is a good idea to try multiple ideas. Try, if you had one story idea and you're like, oh, should I write that one or this other one that I thought of later? Write both, right? I mean, I know that's like anathema to many high school students of like, why would I do more writing than I want to? But it's often the way to get your best ideas out there is like, get everything out in the first copy, and then the second one is a much more natural way of telling your story because you kind of worked all the kinks out in the first try. So don't be afraid to write multiple stories, multiple essays, and it's not even a waste to do so because a lot of schools will have secondary essays, and sometimes that extra material that you wrote you can apply to those supplementary essays. So so that can be really useful. This is actually one of the reasons this is so important is I think my best essay by a mile was one that I wrote like in mid-October, like right before applications were due or something. Whereas the first one I wrote and spent months on and wrote multiple drafts of and tweaked many times, I thought was actually really weak. And I didn't like it. And I'm glad that I got that out of the way so I could write the second one, which was very simple and clean and said exactly what I wanted to say very easily. So don't just keep that in mind, that sometimes your first essay might not be the right one, and don't be afraid to try multiple times. All right, so let's go ahead and get into some of our brave volunteers who have already volunteered to take a look at their essays. I guess actually right before we get into that, we can take a second if there are any questions that came up in the meantime. Anyone throw anything out there? And if not, that's fine. But like I said, feel free to throw stuff in chat if like while you're watching, you're like, hey, I wanted to know about this. I'm going to allow some time at the end as well to also answer some of those questions. So if not, let's go ahead and I guess we will start with Claire's essay because that's the one that I have in the first tab here. So Claire, would you like to kind of join us on stage here so we can chat a little bit about where you're at with your essay here? Let's make sure I can hear you.
Cool.
Hey, can you hear me? Can I hear you?
Yeah.
Awesome. How's it going, Claire?
It's going pretty good. How about you?
It's going well. It's going really well. So I guess let's start with a little bit of where you're at with this essay. In terms of how do you feel about it? What do you is there something specific that you want to look at? Anything like that?
Yeah, it's definitely not polished at all, but it's just like I kind of, it's a little bit past just like word vomit on the page, but like, yeah, I don't know, kind of I'm totally up for like super structural, like big changes or littler things too.
Okay, cool. And I guess another follow-up question I would ask to that is, well, so first of all, that was not my impression. When I first read your essay, I thought it was in quite advanced shape. It felt like it was very well structured and you had thought about it. And there were some, there are some polished things that I think we'll look at, but it didn't feel like a first draft at all to me. Let me ask a different question. So tell me how did you come up with this idea?
Yeah, I wrote one other essay that I worked on for a little bit, but it just didn't work out, and so I kind of scrapped it and used some good parts or parts I liked of it and tried this one instead. But it was hard to I just kind of got rid of the other one. But it's definitely a second totally different essay.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's what I was trying to get across earlier, is that sometimes that happens. You try something and you really struggle with it for a while. It just doesn't work, and it's fine. Throw it away and start over. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. Often you'll get a better result. Like I said, I think this is a very strong essay as it currently stands. So clearly it was working out for you. By the way, we're not going to read the whole essay out loud, but we'll probably read parts of it as we go here. So let me give you my overall feedback, having read through it a couple times. Like I said, I think it's in good shape. I think you have a very strong through line. It's a very clear story in the sense of we know where you start. And I'll let you say this. So what, at the beginning of the essay, what is the thing that you want?
I guess because it's kind of talking, like the end of it is sort of why I want to study like environmental science and studies. And so it kind of talks about like where that came from or how I like became interested in that.
Right. And so at the beginning, the way I saw it was that you're in a place where you're sort of and this is bringing a little more of that story structure stuff. You're sort of in a place of comfort, kind of, in that you're talking about, as you say here, surfing, camping, enjoying outdoors. It's just in talking about how much you loved it, right? But then there's a want, right? In basically, as we get into the second paragraph, what's that want that develops?
I guess to like give more access to like outdoors.
Yeah. So you kind of look at the world and you say, this is not really, I'm happy doing outdoor stuff, but then I look at the world and it's not really the way that it should be. I want everyone to have access like I do, right? So you have a clear want, and then you do a great job of talking through how you deal with that want, right? So first thing you do, I think this paragraph is sort of about you understanding that want, like digging in and saying what happened here, right? Why is this issue an issue? And then we get into the parts that are direct to you of what actions you took. Two separate ones. One, I believe this is what you did working in Los Angeles, and then a second paragraph of working in Costa Rica, both of which were working towards that goal, right? So we see you working towards that want of wanting to increase accessibility. You do a great job, and I like that it's two different ways. One of them, that you can do at home, or maybe anyone can do. You could think about that. And a second one where you are kind of on site, as it were. And then in this case, it's an issue that you don't solve, right? This is not something that you're like, oh, and I did it. I made the nature accessible for everyone. I am the hero. But you land at a place where you did something, and now you it seems to me that you want to do even more, right? So I think that in terms of structure, I think it's strong. I think it follows that beginning, middle, end. We follow you on the journey, which is good. And like I said before, it's very clean. The big note I would give is that right now, it comes across a little bit like resume-ish at times, right? So especially with the work that you did in Costa Rica, first of all, it's obviously great work that you did, but it's a lot of specifics of first I did this, then I did this, then I did this, right? So what I'm interested in is, I think details are great, but if it's just details of like, here are all of the things I did, that's one thing. It's more, what I'd more be interested in is what was the emotional impact of those things? So maybe you could talk about that a little bit. So like you did, I think it was like 5 different separate actions you took in this paragraph. What was your emotional response to each of them?
I think it's good too, because like this is the last paragraph I added. I like had extra words, so I was kind of cramming things in. I think it comes across. But I guess like the emotional, I guess like just all the different things creating, just like learning more and like sparking like the want of what I want to like study and like end up doing.
Right, and so you should think about each thing you mentioned. So let's just pick an example sentence here. All right, so eager to learn more about sustainability and climate change in Latin America, I did a research project on hydroelectric development in Patagonia and how the often neoliberal practice benefits American and European corporations at the cost of local economies and ecosystems. So that's obviously, what that tells me is that you're very dedicated, you know your stuff, right? You're not just paying lip service to this, you're doing actual work to figure out what's going on here. But it also ends up like, I want to make sure that always comes back to the journey that you're on, not just in terms of like your professional journey, but also your emotional journey of being more integrated into the world and actually accomplishing the things that you set out to do, right? So maybe I would ask you, like, how did you feel before and after doing that research project?
That's a good question. I'm trying to think like.
Do you kind of get what I'm getting at though? Like,
yeah, no, totally.
Like it's very logical, and it's very like if you were in a meeting for like a job interview, like you're just very clearly, here's what I did, and it's almost like you don't care. In a job interview, it's not as important who this person is, but in an essay, I want the actions to. what you do that a lot of people actually have trouble doing is having those very clear specific actions. But what I want a little more of there is like, I took them, here's why I took them, here's how I felt, and here's how it changed me, right?
Yeah.
And every detail that's not specifically informing that story is sort of excess.
Mm-hmm.
Does that make sense? So
sure.
like, yeah, so I think that, and that's not, my point is not like, oh, cut this sentence. My point is just like, when you add stuff like that, make sure you're doing it very specifically and pointedly, like you're accomplishing something specific with each detail you provide. That make sense? Okay. So the other thing I wanted to do, because I think it's in great structural shape, is just kind of talk about a little bit of word tweaking here and there. The first thing I saw was this guy. So when my dad relocated to New Mexico for work. So this is a very long introductory prepositional phrase. And so we just want to make sure that that's set aside with a comma. Simple stuff, but you know, if we don't have that there, it's kind of like, feels like it's not a run-on sentence, but it feels like it's running on into the main clause here. But that kind of sets us up. I fell in love with rock climbing, quick club, blah blah blah. That'll works nicely. I prefer, for clarity, this is a little bit of a style choice. I actually like pretty much having commas after almost every introductory prepositional phrase, just because I feel like it adds a little bit of clarity of understanding what's going on in the sentence. But anything less than 4 words is optional. So like that one's not required, but I personally prefer it. One thing that you want to catch a couple times, we'll catch a few of them today, is so we've got one independent clause here, the whole world fades away. And we've got a new one here, new subject, new verb, I am simultaneously strong and vulnerable. So we want to separate those with a comma conjunction coordination, comma and. Minor fix, but you know, just looking out for. I think there's a couple other spots that you want to look out for. I don't know if we'll catch them. Similarly here, through sports like climbing and surfing, again, long introductory phrase, longer than 4 words. We want to set that off with a comma just for clarity. Okay, so here's an interesting question that I had about this sentence. I was interested in because I think I misread it the first time here. So without repeating the sentence, what was your point in this sentence?
I think that just it's like the outdoors are like really not accessible, and like when there's like a very specific kind of person that's in a lot of like outdoor spaces.
Great, and I think that's good. And I think that where I ran into trouble is like when I survey the surf lineup. I don't know if this is what you meant, but I imagined you like at the beach looking at who's surfing.
Yeah.
Is that accurate? So my problem with that, what was a little off with that, was then I was like, you said, I don't see many queer women. And I was thinking, well, how do you know whether they're women are queer or not? Like if you're just looking at them. So I think to clarify that, I would make sure that you say something like, when I look at the community of surfers, right? Or when I look at the, which I think prominent outdoor athletes is a little closer. That's clearer as to what you're saying. Just make sure it's like a figurative looking, right? Not like, oh, I went to the beach and I know none of these women are queer. Like that's kind of like, we want to make sure that you're not trying to judge people like by first sight. So that's an example of a very minor thing, but a little bit of clarity might help there. This is a small spelling mistake. So just like I said, you always want to look out for that. It might have been a typo actually, but just keep an eye out for that. I wanted to ask about this sentence. So tell me about the logic of this sentence. So what's your point with both halves of the sentence?
I think it maybe like worked better how it was before without cutting out, but it was basically that like the idea of like wilderness being like something to conquer, like separate from like society is kind of colonialist in that it like disregards ways that like communities have like lived with the land in other ways. Yeah.
And you do a great job of making that clear. So I'm interested in, like, in this particular sentence, you open it with first romanticized by transcendentalists like these guys. So why do we include that?
That's a good question. I think I took a class last year and I was kind of like thinking about, that's kind of where it like came up with it. Like we read those.
So I think it's fine. I mean, I think it's very interesting, and I think it is integral to the point that you're trying to make. I would just make sure the logic is a little bit more clear as to why how the romanticization leads to the colonialist construct, right? Okay. Which is how, actually, go ahead and tell me that now. How do those things connect?
I had to think. I guess the way that they wrote about like those authors and other like transcendentalist authors like wrote about the like wilderness as this very like wild and like separate place that you kind of like conquer and like are in is, and like that kind of got widely spread and like a big idea in like the US. And so that kind of created like a view of the outdoors because of them, I guess.
Great. So that, I mean, that idea is perfectly clear to me as you just explained it. I just feel like the way that it's currently written, I read this and then I'm like, okay, I don't make the connection to why that leads to wilderness becoming an inherently colonialist construct. So maybe you just start with this part, and then you explain afterwards. Like it started with the transcendentalists because they set up this understanding of what the wilderness was. That led to people treating it like this, and you kind of walk us through the logic of it. Also, minor thing here, the very notion of wilderness is deeply rooted in inequality. Another minor typo. And I think we're gonna have to move on because I do want to make sure we have time for Chelsea as well. So you kind of get an idea for some of the minor grammatical things that to look out for. And the things I pointed out for clarity, like the sentence we just mentioned, are very minor. Like, I know we spent some time talking through them, but for the most part, it's very clear. So don't feel like, oh, this is not a clear essay. I just wanted you to see how you might polish it a little bit more, right? How can we find extra clarity in certain spots? And then structurally, this is ultimately going to be a stylistic choice for you. But I would consider that both this paragraph and this paragraph start to become fairly abstracted from who you are, right? This is like a little mini essay on the nature of wilderness as constructed as a colonialist idea, right? And I do get why, like you do a good job of tying it into your overall through line. So it's not like I'm like, why are you talking about this? But it also does spend a bunch of time where has nothing to do with you, right? So just think about that and think about like when you're tying these things in, you want to make sure that you are always keeping you at the forefront. The colleges want to see who you are. So even if you're talking about an abstract concept, talk about your reaction to it. How did that make you feel, right? How did that make you feel when you learned about this?
I don't know. I guess like I'd have to think about it more, but I guess just opening my eyes to like the bigger picture of how like the outdoors are really inaccessible and like realizing like the root of it. So having like a more.
Yeah, I mean, obviously I can tell that you felt strongly about it because you took action, but I wouldn't mind you like walking me through that. Like, what is that, when you have that realization, what's it like? Is it like a light bulb turning on? Is it like suddenly seeing a picture from a different direction? Is it like, and the emotional reaction of, do you feel the injustice of it? Do you feel like, did you used to feel good about what Emerson and Thoreau said about nature, and all of a sudden you're kind of like disturbed that you used to think this was a great idea, and now that you actually see the problems with them? You know what I'm talking about? Like, sure. I don't know what your reaction is. That's for you to figure out, but I want a little more of that rather than just kind of the academic explanation, even though it's a very good academic explanation. So I think I'm going to leave things there. Any other final questions about what we talked about or in general?
No, I think that was really helpful. Thank you.
Oh, one last thing. What's the title of this essay?
I don't have now. Like after hearing you, I have to think of one.
Well, so when you like, one of the things that I do is when to do a working title, just come up with the first thing that comes to mind, and it can be terrible. So what's like? I mean, it can be obvious. Like, what's the basic idea of this essay?
I guess just like access to the outdoors. That's like very like basic, but.
And that's fine. That's my point. I don't even care. Like, you don't have to, this doesn't have to be what you submit. It just makes sure that you know what it is that you're trying to say. And then also later you can come back when you have more time and think about the way that you want to communicate that and polish that up a little bit. It'll be there. But always, like, I recommend always have that title at the top of your page. Okay?
Cool. Yeah. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Claire. And yeah, let's bring Chelsea in to chat about her essay a little bit. And give me a heads up whenever you can.
Oh, sorry. Hi.
Oh, sorry. No, I just wanted to make sure that you were that I could hear you and you could hear me. How's it going?
Good.
Good, good. So same question. Any big picture, like before we get into talking about my reaction, anything that you want to know about specifically, or questions that you had in general about this essay?
Yeah, so I think my biggest concern with it is that I want to make the writing a little more fluid and actually have the many kind of things I talk about connect to each other, because I think I kind of try to do a lot and then it's kind of like sudden, and I'm just wondering how I can kind of focus it in more.
Okay, yeah, that kind of matches up with some of my thoughts on it. My very first thought was that I think this is also a very strong essay. Like if you submitted this as is, I think it would be a good essay. It would catch attention. People would be interested in it. So it's certainly not like, you need to do a lot of work. But to your point, it feels like you have kind of three major themes ish. And I think you just want to find a way that we can make that all one big through line, right? What do you think? I mean, maybe I'll just ask you, what do you think is the dominant philosophy here, the dominant viewpoint through which all of the other stories are organized? Is there one that immediately jumps out for you?
Yeah, I think the bigger like kind of theme or like conflict I'm trying to set up is kind of the inevitability of like conflict, and kind of like how I approach resolving it and in what ways I've noticed it in my life and myself, and kind of like how my new like outlook on it with this experience. Does that make sense?
Got it. Yeah, no, I 100% agree. And I think that's a really clear idea of the theme of the essay and the through line of the essay. How would you feel about, because the first idea I had was maybe starting with this.
Yeah.
How would you, because what's interesting is that's one of the biggest points of conflict in the essay, right?
Mm-hmm.
Tell me a little bit about that moment.
So I think what I was trying to, I mean, obviously I was like very kind of shocked in that moment. I didn't really know what to say or do or like think really. But I'm trying with that moment to kind of bring out a sort of like loyalty yet sense of like confusion and like challenge to that like already existing not like system but like institution of like that I do ballet.
And I kind of am actually more, let's as an exercise, like rather than think about as here's what I'm trying to get across. If we were just talking and you were like, and I wanted to know what happened in this situation, you're like, oh yeah, I had this realization about ballet, or rather my friend asked me this question. Just tell me about what that moment was like for you.
Yeah, so my friend asked me this question. It was during like an art history class, and we were talking about Degas, and we had this conversation after class, and I was like, I was really enthusiastic about talking about Degas because I mean he does ballet. It's kind of my whole life, and so I was like, and also another part of kind of who I am is like confronting like that kind of discrimination, inequality, and like injustices like that, and like I've committed a different part of myself, I guess, to that, and so I guess like in that moment what I was struggling with was kind of like dealing with one part of myself that's like very loyal to ballet and like very, very wrapped up in it, but then at the same time like compromising that but not really compromising it.
Mm-hmm.
Who I am like more academically, more with my values, just as a person.
So I think that's a super strong story to tell. I think like we were talking about before, stories that mean something to you have an emotional impact. It sounds like you found a great one, right? You found a moment where sort of you have to resolve, where the different parts of yourself, both of which you see as essential, feel like they can't coexist, right? So I think we should start with that conflict. I think we should launch into that. Maybe even the first thing that the first line isn't ballet sexist by nature. And then say, I stood there stunned, right? Like let's start with that conflict and immediately see where you're at, because then we're at the very height of of what's going on, and then we get to see how you work through it. And what's interesting to me, and tell me if I'm wrong about this, but it almost seems to me that your exploration of and thinking about the zodiac and your zodiac roles are almost like a way that you process this question. Is that accurate?
I guess. I think I mean, I guess I look at it more in that framework rather than the way that I actually processed it. I kind of like was able to apply it to that story once I kind of realized what the deep like conflict was to both of them.
Okay. So let me just make sure I get that right. So you, let's go back to when you were first asked that question and you were dealing with it, right? You were dealing with how do I resolve that thing? Did you then afterwards think about the zodiac signs, or was that something that you had dealt with previously in your life?
I think it was after I kind of dealt with the first is ballet sexist, and then just at dinner one day, my mom kind of brought up the zodiacs, and I was like, wow.
Mm-hmm.
I guess that still stands, and I guess it's kind of the same conflict at its core.
So here's this. I mean, because to me, the way that might come together is you start with that moment of conflict, right? The moment when it all comes together and like bam, it hits you. Man, how do I deal with this, right? And then you do a great job in this paragraph of putting us in that moment of how you felt of being caught, right? And then that leads us chronologically in the essay, that leads us to the introspection and the discussion with your family of the zodiac roles and what they mean to you or how they might define you, which then in turn informs how you can resolve the initial question. Does that make sense? Is that? Mm-hmm. So I think that allows you to use all of the really great stuff in the essay. Because okay, another way that you could resolve this essay is you could say, I'm going to write one essay about my zodiac roles, and I'm going to write one essay about ballet, right? Or even maybe one essay about feminism in regards to ballet, and then my experience in ballet is a separate essay. Like, you could break these out into separate stories. But I do think there's a strong through line here, so long as we can follow you on that journey of, okay, I see the conflict, and now I see how you're dealing with it. You're dealing with it by using this framework, which is something that helps you see how multiple conflicting or potentially conflicting ideas can come together to create synthesis rather than mutual exclusion, right? So basically all it would be is kind of a rearranging of the essay. We start with that moment of conflict, and that leads us into how understanding of the zodiac helped resolve that conflict, and then we finally see where you end at the other side, which I think you do a great job of as well, the current way. This is a great final line. I think we do want to end up here. I just think rearranging it a little bit will help us understand how the different pieces work together. Whereas right now it sort of feels like I'm talking about the zodiac, and then all of a sudden, like, you also wanted to talk about ballet. So we're kind of in that moment. And I do see the parallels, but it's almost like I, as the reader, have to figure out what the parallels are as opposed to you like walking me through it and making it very clear how one helps solve the other. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So that would be my major idea here, is to just rearrange it a little bit. But like I said, try multiple things. It might be something where you might just want to cut one of them. Try to just write about the conflict you felt about ballet. Try to just write about the zodiac. See how that comes out. It might be better. It might be like, no, this is not good. I need both parts of the story here. But it'll give you a better idea of what the best version of this essay is going to be. Okay. Ted.
Can I throw in one note? Chelsea, and Chris, can you scroll down to the next paragraph? No, sorry. Where's the dig? Yeah, here we go. There we go. Next page. Here's my note that's, I think, related to this, and maybe a different approach in terms of kind of restructuring the essay. Chelsea, I think you're a really good and very efficient writer, and you're almost too efficient. And so I think things happen like this. I love this sentence. It's a long sentence, but I was disgusted and mortally ashamed to realize that I had neglected the sexism and strict gender roles that ballet was born from and still carries today, where rich and powerful men control young dancers. This is even depicted in Degas paintings. Like, there's so much meat there. There's so much you can get into there, and it's a great sentence. But I wonder, like, should you slow it down? You know what I mean? Like, take your foot off the gas pedal a little bit, and even just like tell us about a Degas painting. Like I got to that moment and was just like, I would love to hear more about this. I would love to get into the history a little bit more. So anyway, that's my note for you is like, you're too efficient, you're too quick. And that's why you can get through so much stuff. It's like, to me, it's astonishing the amount of ground you cover in 650 words. And I think that if you slow it down, you can focus it up more.
Also, minor word choice thing. I'm not 100% sure, but I think this is the other born you want here. Because I think it's like in the sense of came from, this is where it came from. So it was birthed from this other place as opposed to carried from, which is born. I'm not 100% sure. And I think there are possibly ways both could work, but just a minor note there. All right, so should we see if there's any final questions perhaps? Stop sharing for a second there. If anyone like has questions, either type in chat or raise your hand. If not, I'll also put this on. Feel free to ask questions. I'll put up our info on the screen though, just so you guys know how to get in touch if you do have more questions. Yeah, this is our contact info just in case you guys, obviously I work on one-on-one with students with their essays, as does Ted. I'm also, if you have if you have questions about what we talked about today that come up later, feel free to check in. Otherwise, yeah, hope you guys go out there and write some great stories.
Chris, thank you so much for doing this. I so appreciate it. I so appreciate your expertise.
Thanks so much, Chris, for coming, by the way.
Yeah,
I really appreciate you giving me the audience.
You guys get plenty of Zoom school, so we appreciate you volunteering for some more. And I hope this was helpful. I find it really helpful. Chris, thanks for putting up the contact info. We're always available. Reach out to us if you like. And there's a pretty good chance you're going to get Chris if you call. So yeah. Thank you guys for being here. And I'm going to put this recording. I'll put it on YouTube tomorrow morning. I should have it shortly here. But yeah. Thanks, guys. Nice work tonight. And we'll hopefully see you soon.
Thanks, guys. Bye.